Well, welcome everybody to this week's Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark. We have Phil EuBank on as we're diving into the week and the Sunday following the presidential election of 2024. And so it is a fun episode where we are first getting some updates about hope for everyone. We're diving into Phil's message and then asking some questions from the perspectives of both sides of the political aisle and figuring out how we can all navigate what it looks like to come to the conversations that we will have inevitably with people that either agree with us or don't agree with us, and how to show up well to those. So thank you all. Know that our community is on our hearts and our minds this week and the weeks to come. If you need any prayer or encouragement, please reach out. We've got a great team that care and pray for you, even if you don't know their name. You can text us at 650-600-0402. So now let's go ahead and jump into today's podcast. Well, welcome everybody to the Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
And I'm Phil. And we're all you get today.
That's
just
it.
Us.
Yep.
We're in an empty room. We can say whatever we want.
Dude, no one's going to tell on us either.
That's exactly
this
right.
is the best.
I think we are recording it to put it out on the internet, but
no one needs to know.
Yeah.
No one needs
Worry
to know.
about that later.
Phil, how you doing?
Doing well, man.
Yeah.
Not this last weekend, but the weekend before, I was in Wyoming with Alyssa. We did like a marriage retreat for a couple days with an organization that I have gone to, and actually she's gone to as well.
Yep.
But typically it's like there's a guy's thing and a ladies thing, and they're different. This was the first time they were doing couples trips.
Cool.
So it was a bunch of work to get there. Some good friends like hung with our kids for us for the weekend, and it was kind of last minute. But it was really sweet and, like kind of just one of those memory makers.
It's great.
Alyssa and I are not like marriage retreat people where it's like, hey, let's all sit in a circle and hold hands and, do a 6-hour Bible study together. That's just not us. And so this was definitely, I think, more, hey, how can we take honest inventory of where we are, listen to God together, and proactively think about the future.
Yeah.
And so it was great. Got to meet some new people and relax, and then hit the ground running coming back. So here we are. I'm almost all the way better from a couple weeks ago when I preached and only got through one sermon, and got through that one sermon in like 26 minutes. Yeah. So very thankful that is not where I still am. Maisie, our daughter, is one weekend into a 2-weekend run of Frozen in her middle school.
Okay.
She is the troll.
Incredible.
And she's like in both casts.
Oh my gosh.
Which means that like every night she's in rehearsal till 7, and then all weekend, and then we have 3 other kids, and so we're feeling it a little.
Yeah.
I think she's feeling it, but she's doing great, and I think it'll actually feel kind of like our normal life will feel a little bit like a vacation once this production is over.
Right. Well, it's good to hear, man. It sounds like you got some soul care time. You also got some family time, which is good.
I did not catch any fish, by the way.
It's a hard time of year to catch fish.
Yeah. We did go wade fishing, and I got some good casting practice. Yeah. But I did not catch any fish. I felt personal shame coming back and reporting that to you, so I've now confessed it.
We can work about, what repentance looks like.
Thanks,
and how we can reach sanctification together.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
When you get some time away, how does that recharge? How does that injection of just peace, does that do anything to the way that you preach or the way that you teach or the way that you lead? Or do you feel like when you get back here, you're pretty much set in your style and it's just more so a shot in the arm to remember things that you've learned in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it probably affects how I lead more than how I teach.
Oh, interesting.
Your teaching voice, especially when you're preaching multiple times on a weekend, I'm pretty careful about how much energy I'm expending in any given message, right? Because I know, hey, I could go full throttle at this, but nobody's going to understand it. And I could go full throttle at this at 8:30, but by the time 11:30 comes around, I'm going to be exhausted.
Right.
And so you get pretty good at sort of rationing that over the course of a morning. And different talks are going to bring different levels of intensity. To do a talk like I did this last weekend, I'm like very passionate about this subject. So that's very easy to sort of flow out of me. I just feel like the stakes of it are so big right now. I think that for me, it's like these little pockets of joy. So one of the things I got to do while we were gone was ride a horse, and I like love horses. And so
is that a Phil name thing.
It is a Phil name thing. Yeah. Lover of horses. It
Mm-hmm.
works out in my case. And so like it was and Alyssa, who is scared of horses, like faced her fear, and she rode a horse named Craig, who
Incredible.
I think Craig, like Craig was headed for the glue stick factory. Like, I'm just going to put it that way. So he was like not in a hurry. He was super chill. Like he was, he was the perfect horse for Alyssa. So she had a great time.
Nice.
I rode a horse named Bubba, who was really annoyed that we were going as slow as we were, because we were just, all walking along. But I think for me, it's like those little moments where I can be in creation, feel like all the noise is gone, sense God's presence. And then I feel like a lot of times kind of vision or direction about leadership or my own life, it comes in those pockets and moments.
Great.
So in the normal flow of my life, that's like on a bike, or that's taking a walk, or that's personal study. Like these times of, sort of solitude is where I feel like I get recharged a lot. So
Yeah, that hunt for like gray space or liminal space where your brain can just
100%
kind of shut off, almost not disassociate, because you're just getting sensory input from where you are, but you're not thinking about the to-do list or the what's next or even the what's after this. It's just, man, being able to be on Bubba.
Right. Yeah, totally. Well, and the book, we've probably talked about it before. It's called The Shallows. It's not a Christian book. It's the book's called The Shallows: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. Have we talked about this book before?
No, but I'm aware of the book.
And it talks about how basically what we've done to ourselves because we're constantly taking in stimuli is that our brain can't sort what it's receiving. And so the reason that you have these like aha moments in the shower is, assuming you don't like take your phone into the shower, which I guess is like a thing. But like being able to take all the various inputs that you've been getting and like click them together. So, hey, don't take your phone to bed with you, or don't take your phone in the shower with you, or have some white space in your day. Part of the reason for that, I think, even just like neurologically, has shown itself to be that. And then I think we look at it scripturally, and one of the most centerpiece passages for me around solitude is this passage, "Be still and know that I am God," right? Like that was such a cornerstone reality for God's people in Israel. And I think that there's just not a lot of stillness in my everyday. And I have to build it in. Like I have to program it in. I have to stop the other stuff. I have to put do not disturb on my devices in order to get that stillness. But it's worth fighting for.
That's great. And I'm super excited that you got that time and you feel renewed after that, especially as we talked last time we were on the podcast, a couple podcasts ago, when we talked about the end of the campaign being actually the starting line of so much else. And in the absence of you being here, those starting lines have started.
Yep.
And so catch us up. What's been going on?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this last weekend we kind of gave a little bit of a report. So if you weren't here for that, the kind of headlines were we had a primary first goal that we wanted to see 100% of people say yes to praying, serving, and committing financially to the next 3 years. And we started, I think, at like 19% at Commitment Weekend. And then this last weekend I announced that we're currently at 32%, which is like great progress. Like I'm very thankful for it. But I think I underestimated how new to the culture of Menlo this idea of like, I'm going to write down an actual commitment. Like I'm really on board.
Yep.
And so I want to be gracious as we sort of cast vision for that and why that's important. But also celebrate that 32% of people have stacked their hands in the middle and said, hey, we're in, and that's a lot of people at Menlo. 32% is a lot of people. So very thankful for that. And then on the financial side, we were trying to raise $80 million. And this weekend I shared that essentially right now, between current giving patterns that are uncommitted to the campaign and commitments to the campaign, that amount is 65 of the 80. And so that's a pretty conservative number against that 80. Like I can make a case for a little bit more, but we wanted to be as realistic about what that number is as possible. That represents, a significant step up over what we would normally receive over the next 3 years. So we're so thankful. It's gonna mean that some of the things that were bigger financial steps, like permanent campuses for San Mateo and Mountain View, those things are going to take longer. There's just no way around that. We'll be able to pray and see if doors open for one of those campuses to be maybe way more financially achievable than we thought they would be. But we just don't have the dollars currently allocated to be able to do that. Excuse me. But some of the improvements at campuses, kids, students, audio, video, lighting, hospitality, we're starting to chase some of those conversations. And then as financial resources come in, we will take those steps. And then we're taking the steps about the commitments that we've made for the Bay and beyond, and working to make sure that all that stuff is sort of funded proportionally with what we've already raised.
Sure.
And then we'll just keep talking about it over the course of the next 3 years. Yeah. And I hope that people feel like, hey, this is what we were told would happen. If it was more, we would get told about it. If it was less, we would get told about it. It was less. We're being told about it. We're being told what the priorities are going to be and how it will impact the other things. And if you have any questions, feel free to just email me. I'd be more than happy to answer whatever I know right now. Huge shout out to Peter, Di, Elaine on our finance team. They have been incredible at just like graciously taking in all this information and holding it with the utmost confidence and beginning to really graciously care for and communicate with givers. So very, very thankful for where we are.
Yep. I'm excited to jump into the message, but I got a question for you before we get there. So for the people that are hearing that and they're like, wow, they're already almost to their goal, or 33% of it, maybe I'm part of the 66. That's like, well, they got it. They got it from here. They're more than halfway. What's a motivator? What's a why as to, okay, maybe I can't get us all the way to that goal, but I want to chip in.
I would say if we could get to 100% participation and it didn't move our financial totals $1,
yes,
or we stayed at 32% and we could fund all of it, I would choose the former. Like, it's actually better for our church, for the people that call Menlo home, to be a part of it financially.
Why?
Jesus says, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart is. And so, it's not like varsity level Christianity means generosity. Jesus would say, like, Christianity means generosity. We give because God has given.
Right.
And I just think that if you don't currently give, I'm telling you, as somebody that I grew up in a home where this was not like a normal part of our rhythm because my dad wasn't a Christian. My mom became a Christian as a young adult. Their relationship was messy. There was abuse. It was a whole thing. This was never a conversation in our home, and I didn't understand how much God would move my heart until really, for me, kind of college and young adult, I started giving financially, and I had no business doing that financially. Like, if you looked at what I made financially, I had no business doing that. And then just experiencing the peace of God, the favor of God, the grace of God in moving my heart and growing me spiritually to places and at a pace that I would have never experienced before. And so, if just like you have other areas of your life that you're going, I want God to have this area of my life. I want God to be the Lord of my life here. To be an undivided follower at Menlo, that means God gets every part of me. And I think, the question isn't, does God have my money, or does God have my heart? Because he has my money. I think the better question is, in terms of idolatry, what currently has your heart? Because whatever has your money right now actually is the thing that has your heart. Yeah. So if you're like really resisting giving financially to the work that God's calling us to do, I would just say, honestly, give somewhere else. Like, just do something to be generous, because the alternative is that car dealer, that mortgage payment deal, that habit, that hang up that you have, that addiction, that unhealthy coping strategy, even good things that we've made ultimate, they actually have your heart, not God, when he doesn't get your financial resources, and only they do.
That's so good. And when God has your heart, God will see you through things. The trust that you can have with him to, like you said, like maybe it was so hard to give that first time. And looking back, seeing some of the fruit that, not what God did financially in your life later, but how God used that investment in your story to then be able to say yes to other things that God was calling you. Man, what a blessing that is.
Well, and it's not, I mean, it's not like a televangelist. If
Nope.
you give and,
Right.
then God's going to give you material blessings back. But I think we have to be careful we don't run from that to a scarcity mindset, from prosperity to scarcity.
Right.
That we say, what does clarity say? The Bible says that we shouldn't test God. We should never test God except for one area, literally one, and it's in Malachi 3. Bring the whole tithe, which is actually not 10%, it's more like 23 to 26%. Good thing we don't live according to the Old Testament law. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this. This is God talking, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. In Paul's words in the New Testament, he would say, you're reaping little because you're sowing little. And I just think that there are people that are going, man, I feel spiritually stale. I don't know what's going on. I've hit a ceiling. And there is a big blind spot in your life around generosity that I just hope this season allows us to say together, we're going to start taking steps together. There's no predetermined outcome. This is between you and the Lord. But I say it with 100% sincerity. If we didn't move the needle financially, but we moved the needle in percentage, or we didn't move the needle in percentage, but we moved the needle financially. If I had to make a trade, I would make the trade to move the needle in percentage.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love, too, how our team has approached this. Mark Swarner on the weekends at Campus Pastor, the one that you probably watch if you're an online viewer, has said multiple times that we don't know who gives. We don't know the amount. We do not want to know.
Right.
That is between you and God, and we're just hopeful and expectant that people can work towards that faithfulness. And so, Phil, thanks for leading us through that. And then also thanks for leading us through this week that we've had together as a nation and as a country. And even though as you watch this, if you're in person with us, it looked like it was a part of the same series that we've been in.
We camouflaged it.
Camouflaged it. This has always been on our calendar, on the ministry map that we have laid out, a special weekend to talk about the election and all of the things that comes with that. So I'm sure that this wasn't the weekend that you wanted to have after your time back in Wyoming, but thank you. And so let's walk a little bit through just how you approach this message. Run us through the message a bit, and then you feel like, or I feel like in conversations with you, you have unique passions towards this, and I'd love to ask some questions on behalf of what I feel the pulse of our congregation might have, and I think that would just be a fun way for us to enter into this dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are times you preach a sermon and you think, man, I really hope people will think about this, do something with this, surrender in this area of their life to God, whatever. And then there are times that you're like, this is a conversation that culture is having that we're joining.
Right.
And so I'm on text threads with pastors from all around the country that I just know and have been in relationship for a long time. And I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but I mean, I'm like on text threads last week and people are like, hey, are you talking about the election this weekend? And somebody's like, oh, I'll just do this little prayer thing or, no, or whatever. And I'm just like, how are we not joining this conversation? Like we have to join this conversation. This is the conversation that there's so few things that our entire culture talks about anymore. It used to be that everybody would be around the water cooler on Monday talking about the thing they watched on Sunday,
right,
or that we all shared the same experience in some like kind of cultural thing. There are just so few of those things left now. Entertainment has become fractured. Experiences have become fractured. Everything is fractured. And so to be able to have this conversation together, one that actually it's the same conversation but happening in different echo chambers, I think church, when we do it well, it's able to become the third space, right? That like I'm not just in a place where everyone agrees with me. It's not home.
Yep.
It's not work. It's my third space. And I think that a lot of us have worked really hard, whether we realize it or not. Either we've worked hard to do it or algorithms have worked hard to do it, which is just push us further and further and further into places with people we already agree with. And so, if your social media feed all agrees with you, you are in an echo chamber. If every news story you read on the websites of your choice agree with you, you're in an echo chamber. And those are so unhelpful. They're so unhelpful. And if we want to be thoughtful witnesses to a community that is divided, and you go, yeah, but we're in California, go look at the returns. Like this was a wildly divided moment in our nation, and even in our state, and even in our region. And so for us to be able to say, oh, I just assume everybody agrees with me on this or doesn't agree with me, I just don't think that's a fair take on it. But at the same time, I think that the idea of political sectarianism, or that politics has become the new religion, we put so much hope and expectation in people that can't possibly carry the weight of what we're asking them to carry. I use that Tim Keller quote that if we look to our political leaders as saviors, we're actually making idols out of them. Instead, we should view politics as a way to serve our neighbors and pursue justice, not as a place to find ultimate hope or security. And so I just think the church being able to say, man, have political views, like vote your political convictions through the lens of your faith rather than the other way around, and recognize that this is a point of pain that maybe you're feeling, or that people closer than you think are feeling right now.
I've met with a lot of people this week for prayer, and it's funny because no matter what side of the political spectrum they were on, it was interesting to hear that the people that they had on their minds and hearts to pray for were usually across from them.
Right.
And they didn't feel the comfort, or they didn't feel like it was appropriate for them to reach out, because they were pretty fearful of it being like a "I told you so" or taken the wrong way. And it's just really interesting, because if we put our perspective on our kingdom versus our politics, and how Jesus would act despite who's on your side or not on your side, that feeling of not being able to like how we talked about last week, reach our hand across the fence to our neighbor, is removed.
Yeah.
And it was just really eye-opening for me to see that it wasn't age specific, it wasn't life stage specific. There were a lot of different people from a lot of different groups all kind of feeling the same tension of, I feel like I can't talk to someone that might have been on the opposite side of me.
Totally. Well, and I mean, we've communicated over and over and over and over again that the people who disagree with us, they're not just wrong, they're not just stupid, they're evil.
Right.
And so as followers of Jesus, I just think we have a unique opportunity to understand that differently. Like I've heard such lazy takes on why the outcome of this election has been the outcome of this election, right? And I would say if anybody tries to, either quote unquote from your side or from the quote unquote other side, if anybody tries to give you an explanation for why the election was the way it turned out, and they're just like this monolithic, single answer, overly simplified, I'm just telling you that's lazy. It may involve that, but dig deeper. Don't just settle for overly simple. Because what happens is we take that overly simplistic view. We go, oh, America couldn't vote for a woman, right? Like that's a statement that's out there. And so you take that. Now, if you hear that as a talking point, what you're tempted to do is you interact with someone who voted for Donald Trump, and you go, well, they're sexist. That's what that means, because the reason that, and we do that all over the place, right? Or on the other side, you go, well, the reason that someone voted for Donald Trump is because they don't care about women's right to choose or whatever. And now you make the assumption when you interact with someone that definitely is the way that it has to be. Or vice versa. You go like, hey, somebody that voted for Kamala, they wanted unfettered access to abortion at all stages of pregnancy. And so when I interact with someone who voted for Kamala, I'm going, well, that's what they...
Yep.
And so I just think we have to... What culture regularly tries to do is make the complex simple and the simple complex. And I think this is complex. Why someone voted for someone or didn't vote for someone, it's complex. And the best way to find out is to ask. Is to like have a real conversation. And I think so much of what political sectarianism has done is made it so that we simply no longer have conversations. And I use that quote from Michael Ware of Political Sectarianism, and I think it's so hard because I feel like it's so true that we hate our opponents so much, we would rather harm them, even if it hurts us to do it, rather than concede any ground in conversations. Like, we make strawman arguments that we don't even believe in,
right,
because we want to win that. Or we're willing to like take a shot in our relationship or trust, credibility, so that we can win an argument. And I think that is a blinking red light that the message we read from the book of Philippians, mirroring the heart of Jesus, that we would love one another well and that we would choose to be unified, bigger than our political preferences, that we can have that because Jesus did it and it's available to us in him. But it is counter-formational to the formation that we're all experiencing every day.
But Phil, this was the most important election ever, and this is going to mean the end of America.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a joke. He's being facetious because I talked during my message about that and gave all the instances in which those things were said in the past. So, things like this may be the last election. And you're like, oh, I've heard that. Yeah, Barry Goldwater said it in 1964. Democracy hangs in the balance. Abraham Lincoln, 1864. If our opponent wins, it's the end of America. Lyndon B. Johnson, 1964. Or, this is the most important election in our nation's history. 1860, 1896, 1932, 1964, 1980, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024. So I don't say any of that to say that this election doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't minimize it by any means.
Like it's really important. It matters a lot. There's stuff happening domestically, whether we're talking about inflation or we're talking about border policy or we're talking about some of the underlying realities of national debt and tariffs and access to healthcare and all the things. And then there's the geopolitical stuff when we think about what's taking place all around the world right now. I think the stakes are really big. And I would say in some respects, the stakes are always really big. But just the idea of when we say to people, your opponent is your enemy and they're evil, and this is like the most important election, and if we don't win, it's the end of democracy. Like, we just have to be prepared that the more of that we swim in, the more of that worldview we believe, the more that shapes the decisions we make. And now all of a sudden, my joy is wrapped up in my political success, and my sorrow hangs in the balance at times of political failure. And I just think, like, man, go to Philippians chapter 4, flip ahead a couple chapters. Like, that's not what's supposed to hold our joy. Yeah. And it's not in Philippians 2 where we were what Paul says. He doesn't say, hey, if you have political agreement and your person gets into office and you have power in this current moment, then make my joy complete. Once you have that, no. He's going like, if there's any encouragement, any sympathy, any of this stuff, then make this choice. And I think that's just as true today as it's ever been.
Yeah. So Phil, what would your encouragement be to people that might be feeling either super encouraged or discouraged by this, going into their weeks, going into the holidays, as we're sitting around the table with people that most likely we might have some disagreements with? How can we still love and be a neighbor to those that might not be on our team or are on our team? How can we approach that in a way that is consistent with kingdom qualities?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that one of the things we have to do first is don't numb out.
Yeah.
Like, I think
that's huge.
I think that's such an easy, whatever your numb out behavior is. Maybe you're like, I'm going to go watch 40 hours of Netflix, right?
In the shower.
Or in the shower on my phone. Oh gosh. Is that even anyway, that's a different podcast.
Yeah.
Or hey, I normally drink a little bit and I'm going to drink a lot. Or I'm just going to completely detach from anyone and anything and just, I would just say, I understand that grief and feeling overwhelmed are real parts of this process, but I would say that should be days, not weeks. And if that means a counselor for you, if that means a trusted friend for you, like, don't just numb out. I think it's so easy to do it. And I'm watching people in my life make this choice. And it feels almost kind of fatalistic. Don't numb out. And whether you quote unquote won and now you're disillusioned, or you quote unquote lost and now you're disillusioned, like, don't do that. I think let's empathize rather than demonize. So there are people that are like on the other side of whatever your side is. And it's really easy to demonize them. It's really easy to like make the worst case in your head for them, and to be able to say, hey, what were they voting because of? Like, what was the underlying, do I know, am I just making the same assumptions that cable news has told me to make? Have I had a real conversation? I think that feels really important. I think that this idea of fatalism, some of us, we choose to numb out. I think some of us, we just, like, we can head into a place of deep sadness and despair that is not helpful either. Like, what it's revealing is I had put a whole bunch of my hope in the possibility of a politician or a political party, and really what I've done is I had an idol, because they could never hold the weight of that. And then on the flip side of that, I think there's this idea that there's like a sort of a reveling in worldly success and power we can have. And so maybe you feel like, hey, I was big time Republican, really excited to vote for Trump, and now we're going to do it. And I would just tell you, like, be cautious, because politicians have this like pretty big tendency of over-promising and under-delivering. And so if you've placed your hope in a person whose name is not Jesus to accomplish your satisfaction, joy, and fulfillment, it is probably not going to go well for you. And I think that when we sort of revel in it, it also creates unnecessary and unhelpful relational barriers with people in our life with whom we disagree. So those would be, I'd say, just a few ways as we think about, like, how do we process on the heels of an election like this. I know they're not satisfying. Like, I know none of those are like, oh, there's like an easy thing for me to do. In some ways, I think it's about things to be cautious and careful of.
And as we're going, and I don't want to say the fallout of this, but as we are going through our lives, trying to reorient, come back to, this new reality that we're in now, there will be people on both sides of that. And that's something that I love about our church too, by the way, is that we have people all over the political
100%.
spectrum. I love that. And so we're going to go through some questions here. We have blanket questions that we asked, or that we received from a Democratic perspective, a Republican perspective, and both perspective. I want to start with this one actually at the end of the Democratic perspective of how do I model Christlike forgiveness when I feel hurt by others' political beliefs or the impact of policies?
Ask that question one more time for me.
Yep. How do I model Christ-like forgiveness when I feel hurt by others' political beliefs or the impact of policies?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. I think on some level, the first step is to not make assumptions. So, like, I have friends in my life who are LGBTQ, and some of them on social media have said something to the effect of, this isn't a difference of opinion. These are people who don't want me to exist. And so, like, I'm not commenting on the threads, In some cases, I'm just reaching out to people who know that I have, like, a traditional view of human sexuality and gender, but they also know I love them. And I'm saying, like, hey, how are you? And like, I'm praying for you, and I know that this could be scary. But I also think it is not true that everyone that voted for Donald Trump doesn't want that person to exist. It's how they feel, right? And it may be true of someone, but it's not true of everyone. And the way to cut through that is to have real conversations, I think. Now, I think that the policy decisions are more difficult, right? Like, I think some of that is cutting through the noise of, hey, I'm in, for instance, let's take like the abortion conversation, for instance, where somebody goes, hey, we're we're killing women because of this policy change.
Sure.
And I think, you could make lots of different cases for that. I think I've been very clear that I'm like pro unborn children and I'm pro women. And I don't think, like, even though we live in a political moment that wants us to make a choice, which group do you want? Jesus cares for both groups of people. He cares for marginalized and underserved women who are trying to figure out how to make sense of a life choice they can't possibly wrestle with, and for children in the womb. Like, Jesus, and you're like, wait a second, Phil, that just breaks political categories. Jesus breaks political categories. But I think the idea, the like sort of take on it, that just universally it means that we're putting all women everywhere in jeopardy. Well, that's dependent a little bit on state, circumstances of legislation within that state. And so I don't want to minimize the loss of life that has taken place, but I think we just paint with really broad brushes. So whether it's a policy issue, maybe for you, you're thinking about it like on the other side, and you're thinking about like trans women in sports. And you're going, oh my gosh, my daughter plays a sport I can't imagine, and therefore someone that voted Democrat, they must want they must want nothing. Like, unless you have a conversation, I would just say, don't assume that the political talking points you've heard about a group of people is true of every person that you think voted for someone or didn't. So I think so much of this comes down to just removing those assumptions through actual relationship. And if you're like, that seems really hard, it is, but I would argue it's like the easy of assuming narratives is hard too. We choose the hard. So it can be easy on the front end and then hard because we're carrying that with us all the time. Or it can be harder on the front end, but then we like understand and can see people as individuals and understand that they have different perspectives from one another. And they may have voted one way or another for a whole slew of different reasons. And I think all of us, created in the image of God with infinite dignity, value, and worth, are entitled to be able to speak for ourselves.
Yeah. And the relationship piece obviously leads to trust.
Right.
And when you have trust with someone, you're willing to ask questions about like, hey, wait, say what you just said, because if you just told me that you're pro those two things, but you can't be pro those two things. So what do you mean?
Right.
And then that's now a conversation and a dialogue versus an assumption that might lead to a perceived feeling towards you. And
right.
Yeah, that's huge. All right. Another one from a Democrat perspective. How should I process my disappointment or even my anger in light of my faith? How can I handle it in a Christ-centered way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that I didn't preach this text this week, and I was almost going to. I'm going to pull it up real quick. I think that on the one hand, this is something that everyone should be asking.
Absolutely.
Because like it's coming for all of us. Like there is going to come a day when your quote unquote political side will lose. There's going to come a day when your side won, but it didn't do what it said it was going to do. Or your side won, it did what it said it was going to do, and it didn't result in the thing that, like, the scale of disappointment we can experience when we overly rely on politics for our hope. That's Democrats and Republicans. That's all of us.
That's
like we can
that's
all,
both perspectives.
So you may feel that right now if you vote Democrat, and to be clear, neither Republicans nor Democrats have the moral high ground in America. Even now, like it's maybe the most confused that it's ever been because we had two presidential candidates. They had different views around like life, but for a lot of Christians, they have voted almost singularly focused on abortion. And for really the first time, certainly in my lifetime, the Republican candidate for president had really what historically for a long time was a Democratic view of abortion rights. And so all of a sudden you were like, whoa, what do I do? Right? Like it's more complicated than it's ever been before. So this idea of like, well, why would you talk about addressing questions from Democrats? Are they even Christians? We have Democrat Christians at our church and Republican Christians at our church because the most important thing about us is not how we vote. It's that we have chosen to follow Jesus, that our identity is actually first and foremost in him. Well, Daniel is a really important book in the Hebrew scripture. Daniel and his friends, they end up in a foreign land. They're trying to figure out how to follow God in a place that looks nothing like Israel or following God's people. And Daniel had these visions from God regularly. And there's this vision that God gave to Daniel in Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 20. It says, Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Pray." This is Daniel's prayer back to God. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. This is it. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You gave me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. And, we are actually commanded to pray for our leaders. Paul tells Timothy, and I think that that's good and helpful, but I think those passages like Daniel 2 that remind us even the worst leaders in the world. Because, if you take this and you go, I'm not sure I like the current president. I'm not sure I like the last president. I'm not sure how thrilled I am about the next president. That's one thing. But now think about, awful dictators around the world that we would all, Democrat, Republican, whatever. What Daniel just said is that God is sovereign over the entire world. And so we got to find a place to put that in our theology, right? That, God has a plan that can include and use terrible leaders. Now, there's a difference between what's called first-class causation and second-class causation. God is sovereign over all of it. First-class causation is often what's referred to as God's perfect will, he's putting the person in place, doing the thing that's altruistically good and will make a difference. And then there's second-class causation, which sometimes we translate in English as allow. So God allows terrible leaders to get put in place and will still use them, right? So I say that because this is a confusing space to live, but we are in a spot where for you may feel like Donald Trump is evil, and you're going, I don't know how I'm going to pray for him. I would just say, we talked about the attributes of the kingdom of heaven this last weekend. Pray for those attributes in his leadership. And you go, there's just no way God could do that. And I would say, listen to the sentence you just said. God can absolutely do that. Yeah. And when we go back and read about terrible leaders in the Hebrew scriptures, we can see leaders who wanted nothing to do with God, who were not themselves a part of Israel, and God still used in massive ways, supernaturally changed their mind on things. And maybe that's what you're praying God will do in the life of a leader today. But you have recourse, and God is not surprised by this. The White House is not heaven. The Oval Office is not the throne room of God. He is just as in control as he's ever been.
Yeah. It's a great reminder. Okay, here's a question coming from the Republican perspective. How do I remain compassionate and understanding toward those who feel alienated by this outcome?
Yeah, I think that, again, that is a challenge for all of us when things don't go our way. I think that if you're a Republican right now and you feel like we did it, I think that there's just an intellectual honesty about the flawed nature of the candidate that I think goes a long way in relationships. I've heard it said this way, that throughout this election, the left has predominantly said, don't look at the policies necessarily, because it was a short campaign. Don't look at the policies necessarily, look at the person. And then on the Republican side, it was don't look at the person, look at the policies. So it's this very interesting choice framework that we were put in. And I think that if you're someone that's say you voted for Donald Trump and you kind of held your nose because of character issues, I think that probably is a source of compassion for you to be able to have conversations with people that disagree with you. You don't have to pretend. That's what political sectarianism does. Political sectarianism says, I can't let anybody see me sweat. I can't let anybody know any concerns I have about what's going on or the checks and balances that normally would be there in a divided government not being there. I can't let anybody know that I have concerns about the character of a particular candidate, even if I do. And I'm saying, like, yeah, you should probably let people know that.
Yeah.
And then I think, again, I'm not trying to solve this for the swath of humanity that voted differently than you, but if you have somebody in your life, like, actually listen to them. If they disagree with you on this stuff, actually listen. And rather than trying to explain away their fears and concerns, you're like, oh, actually, no, here's why this tax policy is better. Just listen, because usually it's fear that's driving it. And you can have a chance to, like, understand and empathize and care for someone who sees it differently than you. Yeah. And again, whether this applies to you right now or it applies to you 4 years from now, this will apply to all of us at some point, because we are not now on this rapid ascendancy where only one political party will be forever in power. As a matter of fact, you kind of see it when one party gets in power for 2 years, like we're anticipating right now.
Yep.
They sort of sprint because they know that the pendulum is going to swing back in 2 years. Yeah. And even if they still have the presidency, the House or the Senate is likely to flip. And so they're trying to get everything they can get done in a very short window of time. And then you'll have this very same lesson to apply yourself.
Again, from the Republican perspective, how should I understand my role in fostering unity within the church and the broader community during this time of political tension? I mean, you've alluded to some, and I would say this question probably is on both sides of this argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think recognizing the insufficiency of our political systems to, in and of themselves, bring about the kingdom of heaven is really important, right? So I talked about this quote from John Mark Comer, that the kingdom of God is about life for the poor, for the oppressed, the hurting, the immigrant, the unborn, the elderly, the marginalized, the outcast. It's a new world order where love reigns, justice runs like a river, and God is king. And I think that no matter what side you vote on, I think part of what it means to maintain unity is to, like, not settle for the kingdoms of this world. I think sometimes what happens is when we feel like we've hitched our wagon to one particular political tribe, now all of a sudden the things that correspond to the kingdom of heaven that are a part of the other political tribe, I find ways to dismiss those. You know, I've heard it said, like, for people that hitch their wagon to, like, the Republican Party, they'll say things like, you know, the Bible says that the poor will always be among you. They, like, rip a passage out of context to basically say, what are we going to do about it, you know? Right. And you're like, first of all, go read the rest of the context and then read every other passage where we're told to care for underserved people in need, right? Like, right. And so you go, well, I don't have a part of my political tribe can't carry that too. Yeah, like, your political tribe is insufficient to hold all the priorities of the kingdom of heaven, and then vice versa. If your political tribe is the Democratic side, and you go, well, you know, the unborn stuff, I'm unwilling to undercut the rights of a woman to make that choice for herself. You're like, man, I get that, and these are really hard competing values. And it seems really clear that God makes us in our mother's womb. And you're like, well, that's really confusing and hard. Yes, welcome to the kingdom of heaven in a broken world. And I just think we want to remove all tension. Like, we want our political tribe to solve every problem of human suffering in the kingdom of heaven, and no political tribe or party does that. And I think the more we can aim at the kingdom of heaven and even name some of those tensions, the more we can come open-handed and acknowledge our political party or our political personality cannot solve for the kingdom of heaven. Only one person can do that. His name is Jesus. Let's use our politics, as broken as limited and as limited as they might be, to advance the cause of the kingdom rather than submitting the kingdom to the cause of our parties.
Yeah. Phil, talk about the difference that we can make if we take all this to heart, and as we as believers go into our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our schools, in the mix of this, you know, in the mix of all these feelings that we've just discussed, coming and approaching that in a way that is Christ-like, that can be refreshing. Like, talk about what you could see that doing to our local communities.
Yeah, I think that when politics has become your new religion, there are basically two religions, right? Like everywhere has two religions.
Right.
And, what is so interesting, we didn't talk about it this weekend, but I think I talked about it during the series in the spring, in the smear campaign, is that Christian was actually originally a political term. So the idea of like following Caesar versus following Jesus, like they very clearly understood this group of early followers of the way, they were called in the first century. They had a different leader. They had something bigger. Jesus said, hey, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And it was always this idea of like, that is submissive to greater loyalty to the king of everything. And I think that for us to fly above the partisan fighting and silliness that if you really pay attention is not accomplishing very much, I think that we can still have political perspectives. We can still vote our conscience and should. But I think we can love people who are different than us because we model it, right? Like if you're a church like Menlo and there are people you go have lunch with or in life group with or praying for or caring for their family with, and they vote differently than you, but look, we have this same set of kingdom values and we're living into tension with that and we're going to choose relationship and we're going to get to know each other. Like a watching world that has no capacity to do that, like they avoid each other, looks at that and says, wait a second. And Jesus says, the world will know that you are my disciples by how you love one another. And so I think if we can model not a church that says everybody's got to agree politically, but a church that says we submit to Jesus together, even if we see this differently, we're going to love one another well, even if we vote differently. And a watching world looks at that and says, there's something here that is unavailable anywhere else. And I just think that's supposed to always have been our calling card. And I think political division has been one of the easiest and cheapest ways for the enemy of our souls to undermine the calling card of the church.
Yeah, that's so good. Anything else, Phil, before we wrap up?
I mentioned it this week, but on Thursday, so this is coming out Wednesday. So tomorrow, we're going to have sort of a community event with John and Nazu, who wrote a book called Learning to Disagree, that will highlight a number of the things that I talked about on the weekend and some of the things we talked about today. But it's a great book. He's a terrific author. And I think it could be a really helpful sort of continuation of how do we have these conversations, not just about politics, but about lots of stuff. It's not going away, right? For some of you, it's because Thanksgiving's coming up. And so how do you have this conversation and not just be like, nobody talk about it. Like crazy Uncle so-and-so is going to say something silly. No. Like how do you show up well this Thanksgiving? Or maybe you're like actually ghosting a friend right now because you don't even want to hear it from them. I just don't think that's the call of the Lord on our life. And I think for us to be unhurried friends in this season, it means that we need to learn how to disagree well.
Yeah, that's great. If you need any help with that, we'd love to see you at that event. We'd love to help sit with you as well, pray with you too. You can reach out to our team, 650-600-0402. We have a lot of people that care about you, even if they haven't met you. And so we'd love to be a resource for you. Phil, thank you so much.
Of course.
Have a great week, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
See you soon.